Welcome to Podcast 83, a regular look at the news, stories, and trends related to Michigan's 83 counties from the Michigan Association of Counties.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Podcast 83, podcast put on by the Michigan Association of Counties. The smooth voices you'll be hearing today are Deena, Bosworth, Madeline, Fata, Samantha, Gibson, and our new Yeti microphone. So we all sound really good. Everyone say hello so everyone can hear it.
Hello.
Hello.
Look at that.
Hi.
Nice.
Such a cheese
God, I
ball.
just sorry.
Such a cheese
The old SNL sketch popped into my head, when they're talking about Christmas and the the meatballs at Christmas time. We'll just leave it at that. That's a good one. But that popped into my head. But thank you, everyone, for joining us. Another great podcast lined up. It's been a few weeks since we've been on here, and there's been a lot going on that we want to update you on. First off, we made our trip out to the NACO Legislative Conference. A lot of new commissioners there, I think, for Michigan. A lot of course, old ones that consistently attend. A great conference put on by NACO. Of course, Deena, you want to talk a little bit about some of the highlights, and we can all kind of chime in because we were all in attendance.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was great. Unfortunately, I missed the president speaking. I had to leave a little bit early, but we had good interactions with our counterparts from across the country. Many of our commissioners were thoroughly engaged in all of their meetings. We had a fantastic briefing on the Farm Bill and the reauthorization of the Farm Bill, which actually today we also had our internal MAC, Agriculture and Tourism and Natural Resources Committee, and had a further briefing on the reauthorization of the Farm Bill this year. Ladies, I also wasn't there for the Stabenow-Peters meeting, so you guys kind of pipe in on that. I had to leave a day early.
Yeah, so there were, not only did the president speak, and he spoke for a while. He spoke for probably about a half hour, I think, which was, I thought, pretty good.
Yep.
Secretary Buttigieg spoke as well earlier in the conference. And then, of course, we did our briefings with both Senator Stabenow and Peters. Both are always very generous with their time. Of course, with Senator Stabenow retiring soon. After the next cycle, we presented her with a proclamation from the association to recognize her efforts on behalf of counties, of course, being a former county commissioner. And we received an update and a mini tour of the Homeland Security conference room or committee room and by Senator Peters. So overall, a great conference, probably about 50 or so attendees from Michigan, which was really good. We had a reception early, so we all got to see all them, and folks got to meet each other that maybe haven't met each other in the past. So moving along, back to in-state, we've had a little bit of legislative action on some funding issues. Deena, or whoever wants to chime in on, how about we talk a little bit about the SOAR funding and what transpired with that, I think, last week.
Yeah, so the House and the Senate finally came to an agreement with the governor's office on a supplemental spending bill. And included in that bill was about $800 million for, a bunch of site prep, road work, drainage, for a Ford plant in just outside of Marshall, so in Calhoun County. That was something, that the governor had talked about and is repeatedly emphasizing is large mega site developments. So she did finally get the legislature, both the House and the Senate, to agree to the $800 million funding for that. Overall, the supplemental bill was about $1.3 billion. So there were some other, monies that went back into the SOAR fund, SOAR being, and I wrote this down so I could say it the right way, Strategic Outreach and Attraction Reserve Fund. And she keeps socking money away in there just to promote Michigan and get Michigan ready for, further economic development. But part of that deal, and I'll touch base on it real quick, part of that deal was some tax changes. And so the tax changes that we're talking about here were included in House Bill 4001. And that's a bill that would roll back the Michigan income tax rate from 4.25% to 4.05%. I'd like to say that was permanent. I'm not sure that it is. I think that there's still some debate as to how long that rollback will be into effect. But it goes into effect next year. It just kind of depends on where state revenues are and what the legal interpretation is as to whether or not the rollback stays. In addition to that, they increased the earned income tax credit. So right now, eligible families can get about 6% back. 6% of the federal allowance back in their income tax for that earned income tax credit. But they changed the legislation and changed the number in House Bill 4001 and increased that all the way up to 20%. So it'll be interesting to see, really how these have a short-term and long-term effect on state revenues. Oh, one more thing. They did also phase out a lot of the retirement income money. So the income tax that was being paid by a lot of retirees is also going to go away and keep more money in their pockets.
Yeah, the pension rollback, pension tax rollback. Yeah, and that's the back to the SOAR funding. That's the second significant funding package having to do with SOAR. Of course, the first one dealing with the battery plant over in Big Rapids area, Michigan. So two significant supplementals there that kind of go towards the same thing. A couple other issues that we're looking at that are, bills have been introduced on. Deena, something we've worked on, and Madeline will probably be helping out on this a little bit. The veterans property tax exemption, something we've talked about for a while, had some good momentum last session. Looks like we've got some bills reintroduced. Am I correct?
We do. So Senator John Bumstead really worked over the past several years with local governments, with us, with the veterans community to figure out a good way to get local units of government reimbursed for their losses associated with this 100% disabled veteran property tax exemption. And the problem is, Steve, is that this exemption just keeps growing and growing. They did not think that it was going to be very much money across the state because traditionally it wasn't prior to the state mandate that everyone get it. And that happened in about 2014. So according to the House Fiscal Agency, this is growing by about 14% a year. And the number of 100% disabled veterans is growing by about 9% each year. So it just keeps getting, to be a bigger and bigger price tag. Now, we're not here, and I'm not talking about the policy or the validity of that policy. What we're talking about is the state taking away that revenue without replacing it. And so Senator Bumstead has been working on it, came up with a solution that really works for the veterans groups, for the disabled veterans out there, and would totally work for local units of government. And that's contained this year into Senate Bills 95 and 96. Last year saw a lot of movement. It even went to the governor's desk. But because it was tie-barred to another tax plan, it never went into effect. So the problem is not solved. And it's tens of millions of dollars across the state that local units of government are losing out on. So hopefully we can see some movement this year.
What do you have the bill numbers on that?
Senate Bill 95 and 96.
Okay. Sorry, I missed that. So those will be in the Senate, introduced in the Senate, and we'll look for movement on those hopefully soon. Basically doing the same thing they did last session, correct?
Yes, exactly the same.
Good. All right. And then, Sam, do you want to update us a little bit? There was a Supreme Court oral arguments last week on an issue that we've been kind of following for years now. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, last Wednesday, March 1st, the Michigan Supreme Court held its first day of oral arguments in People v. Johnson. That's the case that would decide the constitutionality of trial court judges imposing fees on criminal defendants. We're up against the clock on two different things. One being the Supreme Court decision, and the second being the May 1st, 2024 sunset deadline on judges being able to levy those fees. The legislature has to enact the funding recommendations from the Trial Court Funding Commission prior to MSC's decision. In the event that the Supreme Court decides against judges levying those fees, which that's more than likely the case, counties are looking at facing over, or I should say courts are looking at losing over a quarter of their operational funding mechanisms, which counties would then be forced to backfill. So it's one of our priorities this year to implement the Funding Commission's recommendations, one of which would create the trial court fund, which the state would fund the operational fees of trial courts, but local decisions would remain local. So yeah, we're looking to see when the next day of oral arguments in that case is going to be, and obviously hoping that the legislature acts before MSC rules, and we hopefully don't end up in a funding crisis for our courts.
I will say this though, because Sam, we talked about this just the other day. During our conversations on the budget, on the fiscal year 24 budget with legislators, we are asking for a supplemental appropriation to help bridge that gap. Should the Michigan Supreme Court issue that ruling and we have to cease collection of the fees, we've been asking for about $46 million in order to fill that hole this fiscal year until they can, really act and get the trial court funding situation figured out.
Yeah, thank you, Deena. We do have a plan B, if you will.
Right. And we don't have really, we don't know when the Supreme Court's going to rule on that. They could rule quickly. They could wait a while. There's really no deadline on that, right?
No, best case scenario, it does take them a while to rule, and the legislature will have more time to implement the recommendations and our budget asks. But yeah, there's no deadline that I know of. Yeah,
because I think on the U.S. Supreme Court, there is actually a deadline. Once they hear oral arguments on an issue, they actually have to rule, I think, within 3 months or something like that at the federal level. So good to know there. All right. And then let's see what else we got. Oh, we've got our upcoming conference. So everyone knows, of course, it's our 125th anniversary year. Upcoming legislative conference will be April 24th through 26th here in Lansing, Michigan. More information to come on that as in addition to registration will be opening up soon. We also have elections. We'll have some elections. So we've sent some information out on our Friday legislative update. So hopefully folks are seeing that. We're looking forward to seeing the applications come in for our MAC board. I think we've got 5 open seats for that as well. With that, anyone else have anything?
Well, where did you spend your weekend, Steve? Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, it's funny you bring that up, Deena. Thanks. Yeah, so last week, Thursday and Friday and Saturday, I met Stan Ponstein, MAC president, up in Dickinson County for the Pine Mountain ski jumps, which are in the UP every year. It's called the Continental Cup. It's an international ski jumping competition. Brings about 10 to 12,000 people to Pine Mountain Resort for a 2.5-day ski jump competition. So Joe Stevens, who's a Dickinson County commissioner, invited us up there. We met up with a lot of folks from the ski jump organizing team, the Great Lakes Sports Commission. We also were able to meet up with the Dickinson County Board of Commissioners, met up with them to say hi and spent a couple days watching the ski jumpers, which was a really cool experience. So I encourage everyone who has not been up to the ski jumps to check it out.
They have a lot of great winter festivals up there.
Hey, they know how to do
the dog sled run and ski jumping. And
well, a couple weekends before, they had a kite competition on a frozen lake, which brought 2,000 to 3,000 people to the area. Yeah, they know how to enjoy winter up there. Yeah, these guys on the ski jump, they're younger guys. They're 15 to 20 years old, I think. And there's some older ones, but they're going 55 miles an hour down that ski jump when they hit the end of the thing and going, 434 feet when they finally land. But apparently the Europeans love coming to the UP because they get a huge crowd, which in Europe they don't really get. And everyone just really is encouraging and they just love it. So every year they do the Continental competition, and every once in a while they get a World Cup competition, those are the folks you see in the Olympics. Some of these guys have World Cup points, but most of the guys are trying to get to that next level. So it was a great experience. So Deena, thanks for asking. That was great. All right. With that, does anyone else have anything? Deena or Madeline, you just want to use your microphone one more time before we go? It's kind of quiet.
Can I sound like Molly Shannon?
Yes.
Saturday Night Live?
Yes, you do. You do.
Perfect.
Great. All right. Well,
All
thanks
right.
everyone for tuning into the podcast, and we will talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of Podcast 83.